The email notification buzzed on my phone during breakfast. I was Amelia, a 34-year-old graphic designer married for 8 years to David, a financial analyst. We'd been planning our Cancun vacation for months, our first real getaway in 3 years. I clicked open the message expecting something routine, but instead my stomach dropped. It was from my boss, followed immediately by a text from David. An important project came up. Need you next week. Sorry, I know about your vacation. Then David's message. Babe, I have to tell you something. The firm is demanding I stay for a merger presentation. It's huge for my career. We have to reschedule. I stared at both messages, feeling the air leave the room. We'd paid the full deposit. I'd already requested time off months ago, and my company had reassigned my workload. I called David immediately, my voice shaking. Are you serious right now? I'm so sorry, Amelia. I didn't know until today. This is a career-making opportunity. You understand, right? We can reschedule for next month. I didn't understand. Not really. But I didn't argue. My stomach twisted with a feeling I couldn't name, a tiny whisper telling me something wasn't right. Within 2 hours, I'd canceled the hotel, the flights, everything. 8 years of marriage had taught me that David's career always came first. I told myself I could handle disappointment. I told myself I was being supportive. 2 days into what was supposed to be our vacation week, I sat at my desk pretending to work while staring out the window. My coworker Marcus stopped by my cubicle with coffee, his usual gesture of kindness. Hey, how's the week going? He asked, setting down the cup. It's fine. Just working from home since our trip got canceled, I said, forcing a smile. Marcus hesitated, then sat down slowly. His face looked uncomfortable, the way someone looks right before they deliver bad news. He pulled out his phone and scrolled for a moment before handing it to me. Amelia, I wasn't sure if I should show you this, but I think you need to see it. My hands trembled as I took the phone. It was a photo from Instagram, posted by one of Marcus's acquaintances who worked at a luxury resort in Cancun. In the photo, David was on the beach, shirtless, his arm wrapped around a blonde woman in a white bikini. They were laughing, drinks in hand, looking completely at ease with each other. The caption read, Beach life with the crew. My breath stopped. The date on the post was from today, during what David claimed was his critical merger presentation in the office. I must have read that photo 50 times, searching for any possible explanation. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe it was someone who looked like David, but I knew it wasn't. The watch on his wrist was the one I'd given him for our anniversary. The tattoo on his shoulder blade was unmistakable. My hand started shaking. I looked at Marcus, and his expression confirmed everything. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I handed Marcus back his phone and told him I was fine, though my voice didn't sound like my own. After he left, I sat frozen at my desk for 20 minutes, staring at nothing. The blonde woman in the photo, I needed to know who she was. I went through the Instagram profile carefully, finding dozens of beach photos, all from the same resort, all taken today. She had tagged herself multiple times. Her name was Sophie Chen, and her profile showed she was a marketing director at David's firm. I recognized her immediately from the company holiday party 3 months ago. She'd been the woman with the loud laugh, the one who kept finding reasons to stand near David during drinks. I'd mentioned it to him that night, and he'd laughed it off, saying I was being paranoid. Now I searched our browser history. Nothing. David always cleared it. I checked his phone bills online, a service I had access to for our shared family plan. There were dozens of calls and texts between him and a number I didn't recognize. The calls were frequent and long, sometimes lasting over an hour. My heart was hammering, so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I had to know for sure. I created a fake Instagram account and sent a direct message to Sophie, pretending to be a photographer who'd taken photos at the resort. I asked if she'd be interested in purchasing photos from her recent vacation. She responded within minutes. Yes, I'd love copies. It was such an amazing trip with David. We've been seeing each other for 4 months now. This was our first time going away together. The words hit me like a physical blow. 4 months. That meant the affair had started back in September. Back when David and I were still making plans for this vacation. Back when he was kissing me goodbye every morning and telling me he loved me. Everything I believed about my marriage suddenly felt like a lie. I spent the entire night going through records, not obsessively but methodically. I needed facts. I needed evidence. I pulled up our credit card statements from the past 4 months. There were charges I'd never seen before. Hotels in nearby cities, restaurants I'd never heard of, jewelry store purchases that I hadn't received. There was a charge at a luxury spa resort 40 minutes away, dated 3 weeks ago. The same day David told me he had an emergency client meeting and wouldn't be home until late. He'd come home smelling like chlorine and expensive cologne, not like office buildings. I found receipts for plane tickets to Miami that David had purchased using his personal credit card. The dates were from last month. He told me he was attending a financial conference. The conference had been real, yes, but the trips to the resort weren't part of it. My hands were shaking as I opened a new document and began listing everything. Every charge, every lie, every moment I suddenly realized had been deception. How many times had he told me he was working late when he was actually with her? How many times had he promised me we'd plan a nice dinner only to cancel because of work? I found an Uber receipt for a trip to Sophie's apartment building. Then another. Then 5 more over the course of 3 weeks. The cruelest part, I found an email chain between David and Sophie where they were joking about me. Sophie had written, "Does she ever suspect anything?" David's response made my stomach turn. Not a chance. She's too focused on work stuff. She barely notices me anymore. I had noticed him. I'd always noticed him. I'd adjusted my entire life around his schedule, his career, his needs. And while I was doing that, he was mocking me to someone else. I sat at my kitchen table at 3 a.m., printer running as I documented everything, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him yet, not until I had a complete picture, not until I understood exactly what my options were. This wasn't going to be an emotional explosion. This was going to be strategic. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney I'd found online. The office was cold and professional, exactly what I needed. Sarah Chun, no relation to Sophie, was a no-nonsense lawyer in her 50s who had handled hundreds of infidelity cases. "I need you to understand something," she said, sliding documents across her desk. "In this state, infidelity doesn't automatically guarantee you more in the divorce settlement. However, what it does do is establish a pattern of deception and financial irresponsibility which can affect custody arrangements, asset division, and alimony calculations." I explained everything: the vacation cancellation, the photo, the credit card charges, the emails. Sarah took notes, nodding occasionally. "Here's what I recommend," she said. "First, you need to document everything. Not just credit card statements, but text messages, emails, photos, all of it. Second, you should quietly consult with a financial advisor. Your husband is making financial decisions that affect your joint assets without your knowledge. We need to understand the full extent." She leaned forward. "And Amelia, I need to ask you something important. Do you want to try to save this marriage, or are you looking at divorce?" I thought about David's words in that email. "She barely notices me anymore." I thought about 8 years of adjusting my life to fit around his career. I thought about crying alone while he was on a beach with another woman. "I want out," I said quietly. "But I want to do it right. I want to protect myself." Sarah nodded, as if she'd heard this exact tone 1,000 times before. "Then we do this carefully and strategically. You document everything, you don't tip your hand, and you prepare for a negotiation. The stronger your position, the better your outcome." That afternoon, I hired a financial advisor named Marcus Thompson to review our assets. He was thorough and calm, explaining how to protect my interests. We discussed our joint accounts, investments, property ownership, and retirement funds. He helped me understand that I had more leverage than I initially thought. By the time I left his office, I had a plan. Not an angry, vindictive plan. A careful, intelligent plan. Over the next week, I went into what I called my documentation phase. I wasn't going to be caught off guard in any conversation with David. I purchased a legal voice recorder, the kind you can use to record conversations you're part of without needing other people's consent in my state. When David came home from work that evening, I acted normally. I'd perfected my mask years ago, and now I was grateful for that skill. "Hey, how was your day?" I asked, kissing his cheek while the recorder was in my pocket. "Long, but good. The merger is almost finalized." "This could mean a promotion," he said, loosening his tie. The lie sat between us like a third person in the room. He'd been at Sophie's apartment for the past 3 hours, according to Uber history. That's great, I said, my voice steady. We should celebrate. Maybe dinner this weekend. Actually, I have to work this weekend. There's another meeting coming up. He was already scrolling through his phone, not even looking at me. On Saturday and Sunday. I pressed gently. Yeah, it's crucial, he said, finally glancing at me. I know I've been busy. I promise once this deal closes, everything will calm down. We'll take that Cancun trip. There would be no Cancun trip. There would be no next time. But I smiled and nodded. I understand, I said. Your career is important. That weekend, while David was supposedly working, I followed him. I sat in my car 2 blocks away from Sophie's apartment building and watched him go inside at 10 a.m. He didn't leave until 6 p.m. I sat in that car for 8 hours, heartbreaking with each passing minute, because I was no longer in denial. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a sustained, deliberate betrayal. I had photos. I had dates. I had time. I had his lies on recorded voice messages where he promised he was working. I was building a case against my own husband. I needed more than just evidence of infidelity. I needed to understand the financial implications. One evening, while David was in the shower, I accessed his email from my computer. Yes, he changed his password since I'd last tried, but I recovered it using security questions. I felt a twinge of guilt about it, and then I remembered the email where he mocked me, and the guilt disappeared. Inside his email, I found a folder labeled personal. It contained emails between him and Sophie discussing their future together. They were talking about moving in together, talking about me as an obstacle, planning to tell me soon, discussing how they divide our assets. Sophie had apparently pushed him to be honest with me. David's response: I'll handle it when the time is right. For now, I'm keeping my options open financially, keeping his options open, while I was the one adjusting everything in my life around him, while I was the one compromising, while I was the one being lied to every single day. I also found bank statements showing he'd opened a separate account, one I had no knowledge of, and had been systematically moving money into it. Over the past 4 months, he transferred $85,000 into an account in his name only. My hands were shaking as I screenshotted everything. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was financial misconduct. This was intentional deception about shared assets. I called my attorney immediately. This changes things significantly, Sarah said when I sent her the information. This isn't just a personal betrayal. He's actively concealing assets and moving marital funds without your knowledge or consent. This demonstrates clear intent to hide money from you in a divorce settlement. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means we don't split 50-50. We split what we can prove, and then we challenge the hidden accounts. Courts don't look kindly on people who try to hide assets. This could shift the entire balance of a settlement in your favor. For the first time since seeing that photo, I felt something other than pain. I felt power. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went to work, came home, talked to David about his day, made dinner, and went to bed, all while knowing exactly who he was. All while recording conversations where he lied directly to my face. All while documenting his movements with screenshots and timestamps. I separated my financial life from his. I opened my own bank account at a different institution and began transferring my paychecks there. I documented my personal assets, money I'd inherited from my grandmother, a jewelry collection my mother had given me, savings from before the marriage. I reached out to people I trusted, not to gossip, but to gather support. I called my parents and told them there were serious problems in my marriage. I didn't give details, but they understood something was wrong. They told me they'd be there for me, no questions asked. I also did something that surprised me. I reached out to David's brother. We'd always been close, and I knew he valued integrity above almost everything. I didn't tell him about Sophie or the affair. Instead, I asked him a hypothetical question. If you found out someone you loved was doing something really wrong, and they were hurting other people, would you want to know? He looked at me carefully. Yeah, I would. Especially if it was my brother, because I'd want him to have a chance to make it right before everything falls apart. I left it at that. I wasn't trying to manipulate him. I was just planting a seed. Meanwhile, I scheduled a secret appointment with a therapist. Not because I was broken, but because I needed to process what was happening in a safe space. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that this wasn't about me. I hadn't caused this. I wasn't responsible for David's choices. "You didn't fail," she said gently. "He chose to fail you." Those words stuck with me. Then something unexpected happened. David's company conducted an internal investigation into financial discrepancies in his department. It turned out that David wasn't just cheating on me, he was also engaged in some ethically questionable business practices with Sophie. They were using confidential client information to make personal investment decisions. It was technically illegal. The firm's compliance team discovered it during a routine audit. On a Tuesday morning, David came home looking pale and shaken. "Amelia, I have to tell you something. I might be losing my job. There's an investigation, and they're saying Sophie and I did something wrong with client information." I'd been waiting for a crack in his perfect facade, and here it was. "What kind of something?" I asked calmly. "It's complicated. We didn't think it was that serious. But now they're making a huge deal about it. I might face legal consequences." Here was the moment where a normal wife might comfort her husband. Where she might say, "It'll be okay," or "We'll get through this together." Instead, I said, "I know about Sophie." His face went white. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "I know about the affair. I know about the hidden bank account. I know about the money you've been moving around. And I know about the emails where you called me stupid." He started to speak, to defend himself, to make excuses, but I held up my hand. "I've documented everything," I said quietly. "And I've consulted with an attorney. So when you're dealing with the company investigation, understand that you'll also be dealing with me. And unlike Sophie, I'm not going anywhere without taking what's rightfully mine." He looked like I'd physically hit him. "Amelia, I can explain." "No," I said. "You can't. I'm done listening to explanations. I'm done adjusting my life around you. Starting today, you're going to deal with the consequences of your choices." That afternoon, I packed a bag and went to stay with my parents. David tried to call me 40 times. I didn't answer. He sent texts pleading with me to come home so we could talk. I forwarded them all to my attorney. When I served him with separation papers exactly 1 week later, delivered by a process server at his office, his entire world collapsed at once. The company had fired him. Sophie had turned state's evidence against him in the internal investigation, trying to minimize her own involvement. His career was imploding, and now his marriage is officially over. His attorney, a man named Richard Chun who was clearly inexperienced, immediately tried to negotiate. They wanted me to accept a 50-50 split of assets and minimal alimony since David had lost his job. But my attorney, Sarah, was brilliant. She presented the evidence, the hidden account, the systematic transfer of funds, the documentation of infidelity. She showed the court that David had been actively concealing assets, which meant he couldn't be trusted to honestly report his finances. The judge ordered a forensic accountant to trace all of David's financial movements over the past 5 years. When they found the hidden account and the movement of funds, everything shifted. David panicked. He realized he wasn't going to get the outcome he wanted. He called me, voice desperate. "Please, Amelia. I made mistakes. I'm sorry. Can we work something out? You had months to make this right," I said coldly. "You chose not to. Now you get to live with what you chose." What I didn't anticipate was how quickly the story would leak to the press. Someone at David's firm had tipped off a business reporter about the investigation and the securities violations. Within days, a story appeared in our local business journal. Financial analyst terminated for securities fraud, marriage imploding amid infidelity investigation. It didn't mention me by name, but everyone in our social circle knew exactly who it was about. Suddenly, I was getting calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years, asking if I was okay. Friends who'd been distant during my marriage suddenly wanted to support me. More importantly, I received a call from Sophie's wife. Yes, wife. I hadn't realized Sophie was married to a woman named Rachel until I got that phone call. Rachel was devastated. She'd had no idea about David or anything else. She'd been led to believe Sophie was loyal and faithful. The marriage ended within a month. Rachel and I met for coffee. She brought documents, emails, photos, receipts that Sophie had been careless enough to leave accessible on shared devices. Rachel's anger was pure and focused. She was taking Sophie to the cleaners in divorce court, and she was grateful to have me as a witness to Sophie's character. Together, we made sure that Sophie and David both faced full accountability. We weren't vindictive. We were just honest about who they were. 3 months into the separation, the judge ruled on the financial settlement. Because of the hidden accounts and the fraudulent transfer of funds, I received 65% of marital assets instead of 50%. I also received the marital home, 2 vehicles, and significant spousal support. The hidden account that David had tried so carefully to protect, that was included in the settlement. All $85,000, plus interest. David was ordered to pay me $2,400 per month in alimony for the next 5 years. Given that he was currently unemployed due to his own misconduct, the judge suspended the payments until he found new employment, but they would accumulate with interest. My attorney called me with the news, and I actually laughed. Not a vindictive laugh, but a laugh of relief. I was going to be okay. I was more than okay. I was going to be financially secure. "You played this perfectly," Sarah said. "You didn't let emotion guide you. You gathered evidence, you documented everything, and you let the truth speak for itself." That evening, I stood in my house now legally and completely, and I cried. Not tears of sadness, but tears of release. The weight I'd been carrying lifted, piece by piece. The next phase was about me. I'd spent so many years building my life around David that I had to remember who I was without him. I started small. I took up painting again, something I'd loved before marriage but had abandoned. I joined a book club. I took a pottery class. I went to therapy regularly, working through the betrayal with Dr. Morrison. She helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for David's choices, but I could be responsible for not making similar mistakes in the future. I also invested my settlement wisely. With the help of Marcus Thompson, my financial advisor, I put money into a diversified portfolio. I paid off the remainder of my mortgage with some of the settlement. I created an emergency fund that would cover 2 years of living expenses. I was building financial independence, something that had always eluded me because I had been so focused on supporting David's career. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a job offer at a new firm. It was a promotion, senior creative director, with a significant salary increase. I'd applied, interviewed, and earned it entirely on my own merit. I took the position without hesitation. My coworkers at the new job didn't know about my past. I was just Amelia, a talented designer with a fresh perspective. It felt good to be seen for my work rather than defined by my marriage. 8 months after the divorce finalized, I ran into David at a coffee shop. He looked terrible, thinner, grayer, exhausted. He'd aged 5 years in 1 year. He approached me hesitantly. "Amelia." "Hi. I didn't expect to see you." I was tempted to ignore him, but I'd done enough healing work to know that avoidance isn't the same as closure. I had coffee with him, in a public place, because I needed to hear what he had to say. "I've been wanting to apologize," he said quietly. "Not because it helps me, but because you deserve it. I treated you terribly. I lied to you constantly. I violated your trust in every way possible." I listened, not responding, letting him continue. "Sophie left me 3 months ago. Apparently, she was cheating on me too. Rachel took her to court, and it got ugly. I don't have a job. I'm living in my brother's basement. My career is basically over in financial services. No one will hire me after the fraud charges." Part of me felt satisfaction hearing this. Part of me felt nothing at all. Part of me felt a strange kind of pity for him, not because I wanted him back or wanted to help him, but because I could see he was genuinely suffering consequences for his actions. "I'm glad you're sorry," I said finally, "but your apology doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo the pain or the betrayal. It just means you understand now what you did." "I know," he said quietly, "and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand." I finished my coffee, stood up, and left. Walking away from that conversation, I realized something. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't love him. I didn't feel much of anything toward him at all. He'd become irrelevant to my life. That was true freedom. What I hadn't anticipated was how the story would find its way onto the internet. Someone, I never found out who, had written about my case on Reddit. The post was titled, "I quietly documented my cheating husband's affair and financial crimes before he even knew what was happening. Here's how I won." The post went viral. Thousands of comments. Hundreds of people reaching out with similar stories. Women sharing how they'd been betrayed, asking me for advice on how to handle their own situations. I started getting messages from people I didn't know, thanking me for my story because it had given them the courage to leave their own bad situations. I also received hate mail. People called me a gold digger who was only after David's money. People saying I should have just left quietly instead of destroying his life. People who didn't understand that I hadn't destroyed anything. He had destroyed our marriage, and I'd simply held him accountable for it. The hate mail stung at first, but I learned to ignore it. I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd protected myself and documented the truth. That was never going to be palatable to everyone, and I had to be okay with that. A year after the divorce was finalized, I went on a solo vacation to Cancun. Not the resorts where David and Sophie had gone, but a different one, on my own terms, with my own money, for my own joy. I sat on the beach watching the sunset, and I thought about how far I'd come. From that morning when the vacation was canceled to this moment, complete peace and independence felt like a lifetime. I'd turned my pain into power, my betrayal into wisdom, my loss into freedom. I wasn't consumed by what David had done anymore. I could think about it without the sharp pain in my chest. I could acknowledge it without it defining me. 2 years after the divorce, I met someone. His name was James, and he was kind, honest, and had his own successful career. We met at a professional conference, and we took things slowly. I was no longer willing to compromise my entire life for someone else's ambitions. I was no longer willing to ignore red flags or excuse bad behavior. I was no longer willing to be less than I was, but I was willing to be open to genuine connection with someone who valued me equally. We moved in together after dating for a year. Every day, I was grateful for how different this relationship felt. Not perfect. No relationship is perfect, but built on actual honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care. My parents loved him. My friends loved him. Most importantly, I loved him without losing myself in the process. 3.5 years after the divorce, I received a call from David's attorney. My first instinct was panic. Had he appealed? Was there some new complication? Instead, the attorney explained that David wanted to make a large payment toward his accumulated alimony debt. He found work as a consultant in a different field. Apparently, the financial sector had permanently closed its doors to him, and he was doing well enough to finally pay what he owed. He also wanted me to pass along a message, the attorney said. He said, "Tell Amelia that I understand now why she did what she did. I'm grateful she was smart about it because it forced me to finally face myself." I accepted the payment and thanked the attorney. I didn't call David back. That chapter of my life is truly closed now. To my complete surprise, a filmmaker reached out asking if I'd be willing to tell my story for a documentary about infidelity and financial abuse. It was called The Setup: Stories of Deception and Reclamation. I was hesitant at first. Going public meant giving up privacy, opening myself to more judgment, making myself vulnerable. But then I thought about all those people who'd messaged me on Reddit, thanking me for showing them a way to handle their own situations. I thought about all the women who felt powerless in their marriages and didn't know what tools they had available to them. I decided to do it. The documentary premiered at a film festival and was eventually picked up by a streaming service. My section, The Evidence, How One Woman Protected Herself, became one of the most talked about segments. Legal experts praised my documentation methods. Therapists cited my story as an example of healthy processing of betrayal. Women's groups showed it in workshops about financial independence and recognizing relationship red flags. I became known as the woman who'd quietly dismantled her husband's deception while protecting herself financially and legally. Some people saw me as a villain. Most saw me as someone who'd handled an impossible situation with intelligence and grace. 5 years after discovering that first photo, I founded an organization called the Independent Project. Its mission was to educate women about financial literacy, documenting evidence of infidelity and abuse, and understanding their legal rights before divorce became necessary. We offered free consultations with attorneys. We provided financial literacy workshops. We created a resource library for people navigating betrayal. And we got results. Hundreds of women came through our program, and every single one felt more empowered, more educated, and more prepared to make choices about their lives. I hired people who had their own stories of survival. We created a community of women who had been through the darkness and come out the other side whole. By this point, David's name rarely came to mind anymore. He'd moved on. Sophie had moved on. I'd moved on, but in a completely different direction than any of them. I wasn't living well to spite them. I was living well because I'd chosen to invest in myself. Every career advancement, every friendship deepened, every peaceful moment I experienced, these things weren't about proving anything to David anymore. They were about me choosing my own life. That was the real victory. Not the settlement, not the vindication, but the simple fact that I'd reclaimed my own narrative. James asked me one night why I'd been so willing to document everything about David instead of just leaving immediately. Because lies had defined my marriage, I told him. I needed to stop lying to myself about what was happening. I needed to see the truth, clearly, and I needed to make sure that the truth protected me going forward. And did it? He asked. Completely, I said. If I'd left without documentation, I would have spent years wondering if I'd done the right thing. I would have blamed myself. But because I had facts, evidence, and truth, I knew exactly what had happened and why it happened. The guilt belonged to him, not to me. James kissed my forehead. You're remarkable, he said. The way you handle that situation, I've never seen anything like it. I just refused to be a victim, I said. Even though I was one. I took what happened to me and I transformed it into knowledge and power. I started speaking at universities, at women's organizations, at corporate workshops. My message was always the same. Knowledge is power, documentation is protection, and your own financial independence is your greatest security. I met young women who were just starting relationships, and I encouraged them to keep financial independence no matter what. I met middle-aged women who'd spent decades in bad marriages, and I helped them understand it was never too late to change their situation. I met men who were genuinely horrified by David's behavior and grateful to understand how deception could hide in plain sight. One young woman came up to me after a speech and said, I just broke up with my boyfriend because of something you said. I realized he was lying to me constantly, and I was making excuses for it. I don't know if I made the right choice, but I feel braver for making it. I hugged her. You made the right choice. Trust your instincts about who deserves access to your life. 7 years after that fateful day when Marcus showed me the photo from Cancun, I received an email from a woman named Catherine. She identified herself as David's current girlfriend. The email was straightforward. I know about your situation with David. I'm not contacting you because I believe him. I found your documentary. I'm contacting you because I wanted to understand the context of his behavior. I can see now that I'm seeing some of the same patterns. I wanted to know, am I crazy or is he doing it again? I scheduled a video call with Catherine. For 2 hours, I listened as she described her relationship with David. It was eerily similar to mine. The lies about his schedule, the financial secrecy, the dismissiveness about her career, the emotional unavailability. You're not crazy, I told her firmly. You're seeing clearly. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Catherine made her own choice. She left David. She reached out to my organization, and we helped her document everything and understand her legal options. Last I heard, she was doing well, divorced, independent, and deliberately choosing her own path. David had never changed. He just found someone new to deceive. But at least this time, the deception didn't last as long. The pattern had been interrupted by knowledge. On a peaceful Sunday morning, 7.5 years after that vacation cancellation that started everything, I sat in my office reviewing applications for our organization's annual fellowship program. I had a career I loved. I had a partner who respected me. I had friends who genuinely knew me. I had financial security. I had a purpose. I had peace. More importantly, I had my own life. Not a life built around someone else's career. Not a life constrained by someone else's lies. A life that belonged entirely to me. I thought about the woman I'd been. So willing to sacrifice, so quick to accept explanations, so hesitant to trust her own instincts. I didn't regret being that woman because she taught me valuable lessons. But I was grateful to be this version of myself now. That first morning when the vacation was canceled, I thought my worst moment had begun. It turns out, it was actually the beginning of my liberation. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually the kindest gifts. The cruelest betrayals become our greatest teachers. The moments when we finally see clearly are the moments when our real lives can finally begin. I'd survived deception. But more importantly, I'd learned to thrive in truth. And that made all the difference.